Howdy and welcome to part 3 of forging a Sgian Dubh. In part 1 we covered the initial forging and heat treatment of the blade, and in part 2 we covered the initial grinding, testing, and hand sanding of the blade, as well as the initial work to the tang and the pommel nut. So now let's turn our attention to the handle construction. So the first part of the handle that we need to make is the brass piece that will actually mate up with the blade. So I'm coming in with a file to create the slot that the tang will actually slide into. And you can see here that slowly but surely this thing will get pushed up all the way to the very start of the blade. So we're just going to make some fine adjustments here. And then I'll take this steel tubing here and I'll tap it, and this will actually seat it onto the blade. Next I'm going to come in with a rotary tool. In this case, it's just a Dremel tool with a diamond bit. And I'm going to actually relieve the brass piece a little bit, about a 32nd of an inch. And what this is going to allow us to do is tap this brass piece up onto the blade, and the blade is actually going to set inside the brass piece about a 32nd of an inch. And this is going to allow us to get a nice, proper, tight fit up. And when we look at the blade from the side profile, there won't be any gaps at all between the blade and the handle. Aesthetically, it's very pleasing, but also it just adds that much more quality to the knife. Next, we're going to mark up the brass piece. Going to tap it in place. We'll remove it, see where the shiny spots are, and begin relief carving again. Now these shiny spots are a result from the blade actually hitting the brass piece, and those shiny spots are just the high points of the blade where it's contacting the metal. So we want to make sure that we get a nice even contact with the brass piece and the blade. So I'm just going to come in, continue to relief carve it just a little bit until I'm happy with the fit up. So we'll just repeat this process over and over again until I'm satisfied, and then we can move on to actually shaping the brass piece and getting it put up onto the blade. Now that we've got that fit up nice and tight, we need to turn our attention to the handle. So we're going to do some measurements here, make sure that the handle material is nice and square, 90 degrees. Draw some layout lines, move over to the bandsaw, cut out our material, then head over to the drill press and begin drilling out the slot for the tang. Now that we've got the piece of wood drilled out, I'm coming in with what's called a handle broach, and I'm essentially just scraping the top and bottom of the slot where the top and bottom of the tang are for the knife. And this is just going to very slowly remove material. That way I can get a nice, tight, solid fit up on the tang. Now, I've made several handle broaches for different sized knives, and really all it is just a piece of steel that's in the shape of a hook, and then on the end of that hook, it's sharpened so it can remove wood. Now that I've got the slot and the handle 80 to 90% done, the next step is to go ahead and heat up the back end of the tang, and we're going to do what's called a burn-in. Now, the slot or the cavity inside the wood matches the tang of the knife, so it goes from a slot and then it tapers down to the threaded section at the very back. And what that looks like inside is we have a tapered slot and then we have a round hole at the back end of the wood. And that round hole is where these threads go. So to make this cavity a perfect negative of the tang, I'm just going to continue to heat it up, and then I'm going to slide the wood over the tang, tap it a few times, and then take it right back off. Now we're going to get close the first time, and then I'll have to remove it, heat the tang back up, and repeat the process until we get it fitted all the way down in there. Now that the wood fits up like it should, we can now begin shaping the handle. So first I'm going to narrow it down by cutting it on the bandsaw. Then I'm going to tape some things up and start shaping it with a file. What I'm doing here could be done on a belt sander, but I chose to make things harder on myself, so I wanted to use a file. So I'm just going to come in, slowly shape everything. Then I'll come in with sandpaper to smooth everything out, get rid of all the sharp edges. And I've put some duct tape on the back of this sandpaper, and what that does is it just makes the sandpaper more rigid. That way the sandpaper won't rip in half as I'm sanding like this. Now that everything's been rough shaped, I can actually go ahead and permanently attach the front and back brass pieces to the wood. I've gone ahead and shaped the front brass piece, and I've drilled 2 holes, each at 1/16 of an inch apiece. And I've got some pin stock here that I'm just lightly tapping into place. Then I'm going to use a jeweler's saw, and I'm going to go ahead and cut this pin stock down quite a bit. And I'm leaving about a 1/16 of an inch above the brass piece. And then I'll take a small ball peen hammer, and I'll come in and just peen over those brass pins, and that'll lock everything in. Again, no glue, just a nice mechanical fit. Next, we'll turn our attention to the pommel nut. And if you want to see how I shaped this into a perfect circle, go ahead and check out part 2 of making this Sgian Dubh. Here I'm just coming in with a file, gonna cut some grooves, and eventually turn this into a flower. Now that the handle has been constructed and actually has a way to be permanently attached, we can set this aside and turn our attention to the blade. So I'm going to go ahead and start grinding in the clip of this knife, or the false edge, the top edge, whatever you want to call it. This is the thing we're doing. Now that that thing's done, we can start focusing on the detail of the blade. So first step is to do a little bit of file work, or in this case, Dremel work. And I'm just coming in, creating these little tiny radiuses on the spine of the blade. And this is going to give us kind of a wavy pattern, or what I like to call a serpent pattern. And we'll just do this on both sides of the blade. Get that taken care of. And then we can move into signing the piece. For my maker's mark, I like to electrochemically etch my name into everything. I used to hot stamp things, the traditional way, heat everything up in the forge, and then get a stamp, hammer it in. And that has a nice rustic look to it, and it definitely looks better on certain things than electrochemically etching. But this only takes about 2 minutes of actual etching time, and then when I polish everything up, it just gives a nice clean aesthetic look, and it's a lot quicker than hot stamping, and personally I think it just looks a lot better. Now that we've gone ahead and signed the blade, we can begin the staining process for the handle. Now you can see in the background there, the curly maple handle on that Scottish dirk looks way different than what this wood color looks like now. So I'm applying what's called iron nitrate, or aquafortis, to this curly maple wood, and I want to make sure that I get it nice and saturated so it soaks in and can penetrate all the wood fibers. So I'll let this dry for about 30 minutes, and then when I come back to it, it's going to be an ugly kind of green or gray color, and that's normal, that's perfectly fine. And then I'll go ahead and apply heat with a heat gun, and you can see the color change is drastic, and it happens so fast. I just have to make sure not to accidentally burn or scorch the wood. Now before I apply the oil to the handle, I'm going to let it cool down a little bit because it is a little toasty to the touch. So while I'm waiting for that to cool down, we can go ahead and start antiquing the blade. Now for the style of knives that I do, I like to antique the blades. It just gives it a nice little patina, and it's just something different. There's many different methods that I use, but for this Sgian Dubh, I'm just going to use the same method that I did on the dirk, and I'm just going to use gun blue. So as you can see, I'm just wiping that gun bluing all over the blade, and it's going to look pretty bad to begin with, but the main thing is I want to avoid any splotchiness, any weird grease marks. I did use acetone on the blade before this step just to clean everything off. So I'm going to let that dry, I'm going to rinse it off with water, and then I'm going to come in with some steel wool to kind of pull that gun bluing off of the blade a little bit. And that's just going to give it a nice antique look and kind of force a little patina on there. Now we can start applying oil to the handle. And this is by far the most rewarding part of working with curly maple. So I'm going to shut up and just let you watch this thing come to life. Next, we'll apply some bone black to the handle, just in the low spots. This is going to help give the handle some extra depth and dimension, as well as add to the kind of antique look of the whole thing. Before I show this thing off, I just want to say, if you guys liked the video, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. If you have any questions or comments about anything you saw in the video, feel free to put them down below. If you'd like to stay up to date on current projects and upcoming videos, check out my Instagram linked in the description below. Remember to keep your tools sharp and your mind sharper, and let's check out the final product.